with you on Tuesday. And today we've got a really interesting guy to talk to. He's a pilot, but he's also a doctor. He's an intensive care doctor, Dr. Matt Wilkes. He's working at the moment in a COVID-19 ward up in Edinburgh. This is his one day off, so thank you very much, Matt, for coming in. And I'm just going to bring him in now. Oh, he's coming in now. Hello, Matt. How are you doing?
Hi, Ed. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So I mentioned there that you are working in the coronavirus ward in Edinburgh. I guess we should talk about that first. What's it like?
It's okay. It's quite hard to sort of sum up in a one. But I'm an intensive care doctor. But for the last kind of year or two, I've been focusing a lot on flying and flying physiology. So I've kind of been thrown right back in to the ward where I used to work. So it's definitely the last kind of week or two has been getting right back into the groove. But it's a lovely team and they've been really welcoming. So it's been very nice to help out. Up in Edinburgh, we're probably kind of a week or two behind London. So we're still within capacity and morale's still pretty good. But we're starting to see a lot more and more in terms of kind of volume of cases. And like in other places, people don't seem to progress through their illness that fast. So it's kind of a case of we have people, we bring them into intensive care and it takes a while for them to get out and head home. So it just sort of fills up progressively.
Okay. So we're going to go into our little paragliding bubble because we've got all the
yes.
news.
I can't wait to go back there.
Okay. So listen, tell us first of all, you basically invented this thing called the Free Flight Physiology Project. Tell us first of all how you got into flying, and then how did you make a PhD out of it?
So that's basically the only way I can justify all this to my mother. But, so I used to be really into kayaking and mountain biking, and then I was out in New Zealand working again in anesthesia and intensive care about 10 years ago, and I was cycling past a hill and I saw some kite surfers on one side and a guy flying a paraglider on the other, and I was like, and I went left, and after that so I went to chat to the paraglider as opposed to kite surfers. And then managed to get some lessons off a local guy called Barry, who's an absolute legend. And it was just me and him. So I learned in New Zealand, I learned to fly. I came back to Europe, became unbelievably terrified by just the number of people. You know, anything more than 3 was a busy day on the hill in New Zealand. And just the addiction grew. So I kept flying in Scotland, and it kind of, I think the same course that a lot of people have when they learn to fly of throwing money at the problem a bit. So I try and go away with really good people like Jockey, and spend a bit of time in Algo, spend a bit of time in the Himalayas, and just gradually build my experience. And then through doing that, I started to think, well, there are things in this sport that have parallels with medicine and anesthesia and intensive care. And is there anything from that experience that I can bring to flying? And so I started to just wonder about initially physiological questions and then kind of wider questions of human factors and ergonomics. And I thought, well, is there any way that I can study these? And initially studying them involved borrowing bits of equipment. So I went to see an amazing man in Portsmouth called Mike Tipton, who actually specializes in cold and high altitude and water immersion mostly. And said, I have these questions, you have stuff. Please, can you help me answer these questions? And he said, okay, but you have to sign on to our PhD program. So I've spent the last 3.5, 4 years chipping away at part-time PhD and answering some questions that interested me, at least, about paragliding.
So you mentioned physiology there. What happens to the body when we go flying?
Well, so that's a really interesting question. And like all science sort of studies, you never find out the answer. You just get confused on a deeper level. Okay. But the first question I had was why am I tired when I fly? Like, is it like a long drive where you're not working physically hard, but you're kind of mentally exhausted? Or is it like running a marathon? You know, are we actually working quite hard when we're up there? And, you know, we think we just sit down and pull 2 strings, but we're actually exposed to a lot of environmental stress. We're exposed to cold, we're exposed to hypoxia, G-forces, wind noise, you know, and a good deal of anxiety. And so I kind of wondered how hard we were working. So the first study, what's been known in scientific circles as the GIMP mask study, was where we put a blue rubber mask on people as they flew in the Shah Open And we looked at how much energy they were consuming based on how much oxygen they were breathing in, carbon dioxide they were breathing out. And we worked out that they weren't using much physical energy, about half a Snickers bar every hour's worth. And so from that, we kind of concluded that actually paragliding wasn't really a physically tiring thing. It was much more like driving. It was a kind of mentally tiring experience, at least when you fly at normal altitudes, and for 2-3 hours at a time. So that was experiment one. That was the kind of physiology one. And then for the second one, we started to think, okay, well, the body's functioning all right, by and large. What's happening to the brain? And so for that one, we built a paragliding simulator in Portsmouth that looked at the paragliding environment, just in terms of kind of making people cold, a little bit hypoxic, adding in some wind noise. And we made people do cognitive tests. And we found out that the brain's working actually pretty well as well, under about 2,500 meters. So then that begs the question of why we keep crashing into things.
Okay, yes.
And I think we concluded, at least at that stage, that it was because we weren't making very good decisions. Our body was capable of making decisions and our brain was capable of making decisions. This is flying at kind of moderate altitude, so we can talk about what happens if you try and land on Mont Blanc, because that's an exception. But at moderate altitude, that kind of works okay. So after that, we started to move on to things like our equipment. So what happens with reserve parachutes? And then ultimately, what I'm sort of trying to do is tick off lots of stuff. So if the problem is we make bad decisions, we need to improve our training and decision making. That's something that other people are better qualified to do. So me, I'm trying to tick off the stuff at the edges. Is the problem that body's not working? No. Is the brain not working? No. Now I've started looking at how we interact with our harnesses and our reserves. And if we can get them working better and kind of tick them off, then that leaves a core nub of stuff we need to do to be safer pilots.
So what did you find out about the reserves? Because you did a big reserve study, didn't you? And we've probably all seen it on YouTube, actually. Can you recap on what you found? What about the design of the reserve handles?
Yeah, so first of all, I was like completely amazed and super flattered that everyone watched this video, because it's about half an hour of me joining on, looking like I've been like sort of chained up in Andre's basement, which is something Andre and I like to do, but not in this context. And so we've actually done 2 studies. The first is a study which we did at this big fat repack, which big repack event down in the south of England. And we sent 55 brave and amazing volunteers down a zip line, and we stressed them out a little bit at the beginning, and we tried to put them in the position of someone who had to throw a reserve. So we got them a little bit anxious. We had them with their hands in some brake lines. We had them looking up at 2 LED lights. So we were engaging their physicality, and we were trying to engage their brain. And we did that by getting them to say every word they could beginning with the letter A.
A.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to speculate about the personal life of British paraglider pilots, but the 3 most common words that came up were anal, aardvark, and anal again. So, those poor aardvarks. That was all I could
Poor aardvarks, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you find? What did you find out in this? This is the biggest study of reserve throwing ever done, I guess.
Yeah, only superseded actually by the one we've just done, the next one, which was of 88 pilots. So on the zip line, the thing to appreciate about the zip line is linear acceleration. So it's essentially someone who's flying along in a straight line, and they elect to throw their reserve parachute.
Easy.
In other words, they're not going round and round. That's the important factor. And what we found is that people tend to interact with their equipment in quite a predictable way. And this is useful because if we know this, then we can design the equipment around what people are going to do. And what people tend to do is they have their hands in the brake lines. When they realize something's wrong, they put in a giant brake input, they brace themselves. At that point, they either let go of the brake lines or they keep their hands in them. They grab one riser, they reach for the reserve handle. And if the reserve handle is an under-seat reserve, as opposed to front-mounted, they tend to put their hand on their hip bone and then search down the leg or kind of roundabout from there. Once they've got the handle, a large proportion of them tend to pull directly upwards. So they kind of do a bicep curl, pull up on the handle, and then they chuck it away. Now, if the harness is designed so it works well with this, then the reserve comes out really nicely. If the harness is such that by having the handle in a place that's where the pilot would naturally look, or the handle's cluttered by other stuff, or it's very flat to the harness, or if when they pull up the reserve parachute tends to stick, then the system doesn't work well with the pilot. So usually the reserves came out. So in each of the studies we've done, we've had about a 4% failure rate, which is still too high. So that's 4% of pilots that's 4 pilots out of every 100 who, despite a desperation to get their reserve out, would still hit the ground. That's too much. Because either they can't figure out how to get it out because their brain has been thrown by an initial difficulty. People can't innovate when they're stressed. So what they'll tend to do is the same thing over and over again. So if they've pulled up like this and it's not worked, they'll just keep doing that more and more and harder and harder. And either they're lucky and the reserve pops out, or they're not and it doesn't. And in some cases, it was repack errors. So about 50-50. So it's still small numbers. 96 of those pilots would have got their reserve out, but still higher than we would like as practicing pilots. So people do this stuff. And after that study, we thought, right, well, there are better ways to design a harness. You want the handle on the hip. You want that whatever angle you pull your reserve parachute out, it still comes out. But that study had two weaknesses. The first weakness was that people weren't scared, and so the question is, are they behaving like they would normally? They're definitely a bit anxious, and there was a bit of peer pressure and social pressure, but they weren't terrified. And within that, the more nuanced thing is actually there was no reason for them not to throw their reserve. You know how if you're flying, you think, you have that doubt, can I fix this? If I chuck it, am I going to come down on those power lines? When do I give up doing this? When do I switch from one thing to the other? There was no doubt in their minds. They were there to throw a reserve parachute. So it was unrealistic in that sense. And also, they weren't being whirled round and round. We know that the biggest killer of pilots is auto-rotation. We know that G-forces play a part in actually pretty much every cascade, even ones that start with a stall or a frontal. Generally speaking, if they don't sort themselves out, the pilots end up spinning. So there weren't G-forces and there weren't rotation. So the next experiment, the one we've just done, focused entirely on that.
And you went to Germany for that, and you went in one of these G-force machines, right?
Yeah, it was a hoot. It was just a brilliant thing to do. There was
the results from this. Can you talk about, or is it all?
It's kind of in the middle of the analysis, so it's not that it's deeply secret. It's that I don't want to commit until I've finished the analysis to what we found. I can tell you what we did, and there's a few things that are kind of starting to emerge. We went. There's a fantastic flight school there called Flugschule Hochreis, which is in Brandenburg in the south of Germany in Bavaria, and they were just the most enthusiastic and welcoming crowd. And we went over. We recruited 88 local paraglider pilots, and 45 of them spiraled around at 4G, and 43 of them went round in a SAT. They went backwards at 3G. So like in a normal SAT, the G loading slightly lower. And this time, instead of being dropped and having to throw their reserve, they were doing the same stuff, the light show, saying all the words. They're very fruit-based, the Germans, actually. There was a lot less anal, a lot less aardvarks, a lot more Apfelkuchen. Very wholesome bunch down there. And say that again, Ed.
I said not like the Brits.
No, I know. I'm very proud that we have a lot to be ashamed of. So they were lovely, and so we went through that. And what we're seeing is that perhaps this whole idea of the handle has to be on the hip, which is my conclusion of the last one. It's looking like it actually depends a bit more which way you're going. So if you're spinning forwards in a spiral, people very much go for their hip. If you're going backwards in SAT configuration, people tend more to go further up the thigh, further forwards. And I think that's because they're being thrown backwards and they're almost bracing themselves by pushing their hands forward. So like I said, I don't really want to commit to the results yet, because what we did last time is we did all the analysis and then we went to a focus group. So the guys at FlyO, some of the guys from the BHPA, and we kind of reviewed all the videos and we really talked about it in detail. And then we said, this is what we found. So because of the coronavirus stuff, we haven't been able to do the focus groups yet, but we're still going to try and do them. And then, then you'll read it in everyone's favorite paragliding magazine.
I guess so. I hope so. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that update. And just very briefly, some of us filled out or some of the subscribers of Cross Country Magazine would have filled out a survey recently, a safety survey, which you sent out. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I guess you haven't done any analysis of that either.
So I've done a little bit of analysis. So again, this is all preliminary stuff. Teasers for the amazing articles soon to appear in your favorite paragliding magazine. I was really grateful to the readers of Cross Country. So one of the issues in flying, in paragliding, is that I can't tell you what the risks are, which is quite a fundamental question. So if you go and fly a Cessna, I can tell you that roughly 0.7 per 100,000 flights will end in an accident in which somebody's killed. Now, I can't tell you that in paragliding. I can tell you roughly how many paraglider pilots are members of the BHPA or national associations. And I can tell you roughly how many incidents the BHPA investigates and how many fatalities they are. But not every incident is reported, though I think every fatality probably is in the UK. But also, we don't know what those 5,800 odd BHPA pilots are actually doing. We don't know how many flights they're making. We don't know how many hours they're spending in the air. We don't know what those hours entail. Is it soaring? Is it thermaling? Is it infinity tumbles? So it's very hard to accurately characterize the risks of what we do. And there's two reasons why that's important. Like, the first is that you kind of want to make an informed decision about what you're doing. But the also is that if you're trying to improve safety, unless you see the rates improve, you don't know that what you're doing is helpful. In fact, what you're doing you might be making it worse. So we really need to understand how much flying we do. And so the idea of the cross-country survey was to ask a bunch of pilots how much flying they were doing. And it's not the perfect way to study it, because not everyone is a reader of cross-country. Some people are deviants. And also not exactly. And also not every reader of cross-country responded to the survey. So and I kind of imagined that those people who had fatal accidents probably didn't respond to the survey. So we're not capturing everybody, but we certainly had a good selection. So we asked 7,500 people to take part, and we got about 28% response rate. So we got just under 2,000 people filled out the surveys. So I'm incredibly grateful to everybody who did that. What's emerging is that paragliding is probably twice as risky as general aviation, as taking a Cessna out in the UK and flying it. So the numbers are still a little rough, but we're looking at a fatality rate of roughly 1.4 per 100,000 flights or thereabout. So it's a very rough number, but it's the first time that number's been calculated. And of the order of 25 serious injuries per 100,000 flights.
And that's all to come. You're going to write that all up later this summer once you've got more spare.
I'm going to write it all up later this summer. There's a lot of interesting stuff that's come out of it beyond just the basic numbers of what people are doing, the kind of incidents that people are having. So as soon as I can duck out of Coronaville, I'm going to try and get this all written up. It's actually, to be honest, I've got nothing else to do on my day off. So it's good. I'd also like to say that I'm actually deeply grateful to the members of the flying community who've kind of stepped back their flying a little bit at this moment. Obviously, kind of nothing makes me happier than seeing people in the air, and it's what I dream about. But there's an enormous burden on the health service at the moment, and so I'd really appreciate if people didn't go and crash at the moment.
I think we all have that message. And everyone I know is not flying at the moment, and we've all sort of stepped back. We all understand that.
Yeah, and just on behalf of fellow doctors, I'm incredibly grateful, because honestly, I've looked out of the window of the ward and seen the most cracking cross-country days over the last few days.
It's nice to say as well. Yeah.
Oh, these lovely Kiwis just stretching out away from Edinburgh Royal. But thank you to those guys not taking advantage of it. Like, we will all fly again, and we'll have a cracking time when we do.
Exactly, we will all fly again. So listen, Matt, that's our 20 minutes up. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been really insightful, really easy to talk to, and yeah, good luck for the rest of the next few weeks, couple of months, and we will fly again. We'll see you in the air. We
will. Thank you for all your support with the studies, and thank you for having me on. We'll be into the sky soon, my friends. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.